Again, we just did a delayed drive-through episode, delayed by 1 day because of various issues. And then we're tasked with talking about, the loss of Terry Funk because that happened imminently right before we started recording. And then again, within the space of, 24 hours or maybe not even, we get the news that Bray Wyatt passes away. And we had heard that he had some kind of health issue, but I don't know that anybody was spreading anything around that it was that serious or potentially that serious. He was only 36 years old. And since he had been off, WWE tell him a couple of different times and released and brought back, yes, his departure appeared odd, but at the same time, it wasn't anything out of character of the last couple of years where they've started and stopped something or let him go and brought him back. So it was, I think, a shock to everybody. But then we find out that, according to what's been released, his close family and friends at least knew that it had been a serious health issue where he apparently got COVID and it exacerbated an existing or congenital heart issue that he had. But that's why the word had been going around that he was close to coming back, or he was, close to being cleared, or whatever the terminology was, because he was improving. And then, what was this, Thursday afternoon, Brian, or was it Friday, that he had a heart attack, I guess out of nowhere, and died?
Well, Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful was the one who reported, and I have it here, it was on Twitter, I was given permission to reveal that earlier this year, Wyndham Rotunda, Bray Wyatt, got COVID that exacerbated a heart issue. There was a lot of positive progress towards a return and his recovery. Unfortunately, today he suffered a heart attack and passed away.
So, and a lot of people on Twitter instantly were drawing the comparison with, he was in a group with Brody Lee, and what was the name he was using at that time? Brody Lee was
Luke Harper.
Luke Harper. And not the exact same thing, but a similar issue happened. A disease discovered young age, and that's spooky in itself. But obviously this week, with everybody talking about and upset about, Terry, it was a double whammy, but two completely different situations, in that, Terry would have been 80 on his next birthday, and obviously had health issues for a while, whereas, this is, I guess he has several children. It was with one of the ring announcers, JoJo.
Yeah, JoJo Offerman. Her dad was a baseball player, Jose Offerman.
I should have known you'd know that. And to be honest, first of all, I'm going to preface this with, I never met or spoke to or had any interaction with Bray Wyatt in my life. So, and I certainly had nothing against him, even though we've knocked his wrestling. Or, I don't know, we knocked his wrestling as much as we knocked how his gimmick was portrayed, or what surrounded the non-wrestling aspects of it. But I certainly knew Mike Rotunda, who was a great guy, and obviously Bray was grandson of Blackjack Mulligan, but I don't know all the different relations, but Barry Windham, Mike Rotunda, all these, wrestlers in the family, his brother, Bo Dallas. So, you hate to hear something like that, because everybody's got to be brokenhearted, not only in his family, but also from what everybody said on Twitter, all of the boys and girls in the business. Everybody loved this guy. Nobody had anything bad to say about him, or had any issues. Maybe, I don't know. maybe some of the people did not necessarily look forward to working with him for the last couple of years, the incarnation of his gimmick, just because it was hard to come out of that. But as a person, it seems like everybody, loved him. So, again, there's a lot of people that I would rather not see on any more wrestling shows. That doesn't mean that I want anything bad to happen to them. There is a handful of people that I do, and whenever something bad happens to them, you'll hear me crowing about it. But this is not one of those instances.
Certainly a really talented guy, and like you said, a lot of the things that he did weren't things that we typically enjoy, and we didn't. But there was always that talent. You could always see it there. I always said, I wish this guy would go to Hollywood and make something, because he's clearly a creative guy, and he appeared to be trying to mix the wrestling stuff with, I don't know what you want to call it, horror, science fiction, different outside elements. And if you like him or not, and we're not fans of that kind of stuff, you could certainly say revolutionary. No one had ever done anything like that stuff in professional wrestling before. I doubt anyone's going to do anything like that ever again. But it was completely different even than his earlier stuff. Remember, a lot of these guys kind of came up together through the first group of like what Florida Championship Wrestling turning into NXT. The guys that were working with Dusty Rhodes, The Shield, the Wyatt family. So many of these people. When The Shield were first breaking big, remember the Wyatts came up from NXT and almost right away got a push as a top guy. Well, he got him as a top guy, but his two guys as his serious threats wearing the spooky masks. Amazing entrance. He had a great theme song. He came out to WrestleMania one time with them playing it. It was a really, really amazing entrance. And a lot of the stuff with the rise of Bryan Danielson, or Daniel Bryan, was mixed in with the Wyatt family.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that, unfortunately, I was not watching any of the programming during the Wyatt family period of time. I would hear about and or read about on the, interweb or whatever, the Wyatt family, spooky swamp dwellers. I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. It wasn't necessarily interesting enough to make me watch the programs. When you and I started doing these podcasts, and the people basically demanded that we review this stuff, that period had already passed, and we were getting, the Indestructible Fiend and the Funhouse with the puppets, and I couldn't get it. But the concept of, and when I've seen the spooky video since then that they do whenever they do a retrospective or whatever, that intrigues me. I might go back and try to find some of that stuff if I only had time, Gordon Soley. And then conversely, when it was the last time that he re-debuted this past run, when he came out and he was talking as himself, or what we believed he was, or you know what I'm saying, more as him as a person. Right. Remember, I said, this guy can fucking talk. He's spellbinding. But he never, to me, never finished the story he was trying to tell me, but I was listening to him the whole way because of the way he was telling it. And I said, what, in a previous era, because he does have the wrestling business in his genes from his 3 generations. In a previous era, a guy like that, a territory, could have been the King Curtis level heel that you hear about in Hawaii, where you just talk to people in the building. Or the, Bugsy McGraw, Florida, Handsome Jimmy Valiant, Memphis gimmick babyface that could talk to people in the building just with the promos, regardless of his work, which, was obviously probably at a better level than some of the instances I just gave.
His grandfather.
His grandfather could talk to people in the blackjack. So that it would have been interesting to see him and that talent applied to the wrestling business, the territory wrestling business, which I believe he would have excelled at. So while I never got the puppets and the spooky supernatural presentation, yeah, you could see this guy. He was made for the wrestling business because he could talk to people and he could be real, whether he's being real or he was working real, he could be real. And sincerity is the key. When you learn to fake that, you've got it made.
When you look at the wrestling business right now and the men and women in the locker room, there aren't a lot of young wrestling deaths like there used to be. I mean, the most recent one, and it's sad that it's linked up with this, but of course, Brody Lee. He was in his 30s too, I believe. And before that, it's been a while. What do you think they're going through right now? The people who worked with him, who knew him, who expected to see him back, who never thought anything like this would happen, because for a while, for very different reasons, that was a very common thing in the wrestling business, the idea of someone dying in their 30s.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of gone full circle. Deaths of early ages of wrestlers never happened, except rarely, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the territory days, into the start of the 80s. It was car wrecks or, every once in a while, some type of outside the ring, tragedy, something you couldn't avoid. Or in those days also, guys worked till they were older. So you would get guys in their 50s that may, come down with some illness or whatever, but it wasn't, the car wrecks were the worst thing. And then starting with Rick McGraw, maybe early 80s, he was the first one. It was in his early 30s.
Well, within a year, David Von Erich, Rick McGraw, Jay Youngblood.
Well, I thought Rick was first and then David.
No, David was first.
It was David. All right.
Because David was the beginning of 84. Rick McGraw was 85.
All right. Well, it's been 40 years. So I'm older too. The point is, all of it, Rick McGraw, then David Von Erich, then Jay Youngblood. And that was kind of the, opening round of the modern. The steroids were not a thing until the early pioneers, Superstar, whatever, but until the 80s, really on a widespread basis. And honestly, neither were fucking pills. There was a lot of guys that were alcoholics, and you could work with that in the wrestling business. But the pain pills came along also, and then cocaine did a goddamn deal on everybody's heart from the 80s and 90s. So then it became a thing where you just heard it and heard it and heard it. And that didn't stop until 15 years ago.
Yeah, really kind of, after everything with Eddie Guerrero and then Benoit, I mean, very different situations, but
yeah,
the entire industry seemed to change. And also the crop of people coming up in the business were different people, different generation of people than the one before it.
Well, and also, to be honest, the changes in the business, it helped in a lot of ways in that the WWF testing for shit, regardless of what you think about the program, it slowed some shit down and or put stumbling blocks in guys' way intermittently. But as well, the fact that there was hardly any place else to go and make any serious money in the wrestling business, the guys on the independents couldn't spend as much money on drugs as they used to. Or the ones that did ended up on dark side of the ring. And there became the one or two big companies that were, more respectable and tried to have a more respectable image at the top. And then nobody could afford, what was going on or what needed to go on to get a bad habit on the independents. That had to have a effect on it as well. And yes, the generations changed. But then, unfortunately, I think when everybody quit cocaine, the pain pills became a bigger thing. And you still can't convince me that it's probably not going to be a problem in the future with the way these guys are destroying themselves on a regular basis. But the guys, you asked the question, this generation, how do you think they're dealing with it? Probably not well, because they're not used to it. And I remember when it was a shocking thing too. And they better hope for various, I mean, this is something that couldn't be prevented. Obviously, it's a congenital defect exacerbated by a mysterious virus that we still don't know all the effects of. But as far as the damage they're doing to their bodies and the dependencies they're going to be having later on, the generation 40 years ago jacked themselves all up on monkey hormones to look like the Road Warriors so they could get a job with the biggest company and look the part, and their wrestling was the shits. But now, nobody looks the part, but they're killing their fucking bodies in a different fashion. They're not poisoning themselves with steroids. They're demolishing their goddamn skeletons in front of our very eyes. And what's going to happen? It's always something different, but you know, it just depends on whether or not people get a grip on it in time or not. Have I gone completely off the topic now?
Well, not necessarily. I guess the point is just there was a time where wrestlers now are not used to this kind of feeling of losing one of their compatriots. You know, I have right here some of the roster of NXT from a little more than a decade ago. I'll go through some of the names that you would know that were on the roster at the same time. Rusev, when he was Alexander Rusev.
Yeah.
Big E, Baron Corbin, Bo Dallas, Brad Maddox, Bray Wyatt, Byron Saxton, Colin Cassidy, that's Big Bill, Corey Graves, Danny Burch, Dean Ambrose, Eric Rowan, Jay Bronson, that's Braun Strowman, Jason Jordan, Judas Devlin, I think that's Luchasaurus, Cassius Ohno, that's Chris Hero, Leo Kruger, that was it Adam Rose? I forget what his name was exactly. Luke Harper, Mojo Rawley, Richie Steamboat, I mean, that's how long ago this is, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Xavier Woods. So a lot of the guys on the main roster today in AEW and WWE came up with this guy. And again, before he was Bray Wyatt, if they were there then, they saw him create Bray Wyatt. He came up to the main roster as Husky Harris.
Yeah, that's right. Husky Harris, which was, I guess, some kind of nodding rib to his beefy physique that they like Shorty Gable or whatever. And he got out of that.
Yeah, but I remember when he first appeared as that, I wanted to see more of that because no one had a physique like that. I mean, it wasn't over the top like late era Adrian Adonis, but it was kind of in tune with mid-period Adrian Adonis. And he could move. And I knew his family
I
was.
always hate when they give guys names like that. It's like instead of the Haystacks Calhoun, they would call him Fat Guy.
But
here's Fat Guy.
Name withstanding, and I agree with you. I wanted to see more of him. I didn't necessarily like the name. That is the kind of name that hangs over someone. Terry Taylor never escaped the Red Rooster.
Yeah.
To this day. He escaped Husky Harris. He created something completely different, a completely different world around it, with the music, with the entrance, with Harper and Rowan with him, and eventually Strowman. He successfully got away from something that was a typical WWE, let's bring someone up from developmental and ruin them gimmick or name, and he created something of his own.